Hello and welcome back to the Lore Raider. We've had one Tomb Raider video, one Metroid lore video, so it's time for a Metroid scaling video. Back in the prehistoric year of 2023, I made videos asking what would happen if the Flood replaced the X in Metroid Fusion, and what if the X Parasites replaced the Flood during the events of Halo Combat Evolved. Today, however, I'm going to finally complete the trilogy by answering the question that so many people have wanted to answer for. The X-Parasites versus the Flood. If fiction's two deadliest diseases met each other for a fight for survival, who would win? What's that? Did you say the Tyrannid from Warhammer 40k? Oh, well, let me show you where they belong next to the X and the Flood. Let's start with the X-Parasites. The X are a species that hail from the vile world known as SR-388, famously considered by the Chozo to be the greatest threat to all life in the galaxy. The X have a very simple lifestyle. A singular X-Parasite will find a host before entering its body, immediately killing it, and stealing its genetic material. It will then feed off the remains of its prey until all that remains is a skeletal husk, where it will then continue to mimic the digested creature, but by now having reproduced several new X-Parasites of its own. Notably, the X steal the memories and intelligence of whatever they eat, allowing them to precisely mimic whatever they copied, though sometimes they even make it even stronger than the original. This even goes for extremely complex prey, both in their genetic makeup like the hybrid Samus Aran, to cyborgs with complex machinery such as the Nightmare with its gravity control technology. What makes free-form X-Parasites even more dangerous, though, is their complete intangibility, as weapons will harmlessly pass through them and they can fly through walls with consummate ease. Their only weakness being the artificial life-draining species known as the Metroids, which the Flood don't have, and the complete destruction of their habitat, namely by blowing it to space dust. Their opponents, the Flood, are no less insidious. The Flood don't technically have a homeworld, but their life cycle is far more complicated than the X. Effectively, and this is oversimplifying, the Flood infection form must find a suitable host, usually one of high intelligence and more specifically a complex nervous system, in which they will insert themselves into their target and hijack them. From there, this mindless Flood form will likely develop into a carrier form and birth new infection forms to repeat the process. The Flood possess a hive mind that gets progressively more intelligent the more intelligent beings it consumes. Once it eats enough, they'll go from the mindless feral stage to the semi-coordinated proto-grave mind stage. Once it has eaten thousands more victims, it eventually progresses into a full grave mind, and easily possesses intelligence surpassing that of genius-level AI like Cortana. After a certain point, the Flood no longer strictly need infection forms to infect others, and they will start producing Flood spores, which will get the job done just as well. The Flood, unlike their X counterparts, do have several weaknesses, including fire, they spread slower in the cold, and they can be shot and killed like anything else. And of course, if you blew up their planets, they'd be just as dead as the X. Otherwise. It's time for the grand finale. Let's get into the match itself. I, of course, have to equalize the speed of the respective universes, as otherwise, the immeasurable speed Metroid-based X would speed blitz the relatively sluggish Halo-based Flood. Now, starting with a 1-2 combo of a one-on-one scenario,
a brawl is surely brewing, and begin!
In which it's one Flood form versus one X-Parasite, who would win? The X. Pretty easily. The Flood cannot actually latch onto the X, and the X don't have a nervous system anyway, while the X can more than capably eat a Flood. Now, if we made it a 1X versus a proto-grave mind, now the scenario gets even just as bad, actually. The X have no startup lag. Now, what do I mean by that? The Flood need to eat multiple sentient beings to slowly accrue intelligence. However, the X, if they eat one Flood form, they instantly take whatever intelligence they had from that and whatever memories they have for that. And so, in this scenario, the X simply win. even when we make it 1x Parasite versus the Grave Mine, and we give the Grave Mine millions of Flood forms to fight with, there just isn't anything the Flood can do. Now, to be fair, they would have the intelligence to create their own Metroids to make that sort of win condition. The problem is it took the Chozo, they're a genius race in their own right, at least half a century to make proper Metroids. And if the X infect a Flood form and get the intelligence jump, they'll do everything they can to undermine the Flood efforts. This is without even mentioning that in the present day, the X have absorbed the memories of the entire Makin tribe of Chozo and are in of themselves very intelligent now. In fact, the X, as seen in Metroid Fusion, are more than willing to self-mutate new X variants to undermine a foe. So out of 10 scenarios, I'd say the X win a very slim 10 scenarios out of 10 handily. You'd have to give the Flood the most beneficial circumstances possible. I mean, like having them control the whole universe, which would be just outrageous. And they have to give the X the least favorable matchup possible, making it just 1x for the Flood to maybe win. But that's all she wrote. You know how I leave you. Be safe, be wise, and if you have any more one-sided matchups, I mean completely fair and totally honest, hard-working matchups, let me know down below. See ya.